My intention is that this no fuss, no frills video will demonstrate the simplicity behind the Nutanix platform. And we start by simply logging into the management interface, which we call Prism. I'm going to use one of our local accounts along with an appropriate password. Connection, as you can see, is made through a browser. And once we've reached what we call the home dashboard, I'll want to draw your attention to the hardware summary. Now, this is just a little bit on terminology before we get really into the demo. Where you see hosts, that term can also be interchangeable with nodes. I guess you can also think of it as servers, but when you're referring to some of the Nutanix documentation, or a lot of the Nutanix documentation, will either refer to the servers, if you like, in your cluster as hosts or nodes. Where you see a block, think of that as a passive chassis in that there's no active backplane. Its job is to simply house the hosts and to provide redundant power. Now, Prism itself is installed as a service on all of the hosts within the cluster. I've connected into Prism today using a virtual IP address, a cluster virtual IP address. Now, this is normally configured during deployment, but you can configure it at any time, and you can update it by simply selecting the cluster name in the top left-hand corner, which will give you access to the cluster details, and you can see the virtual IP address listed. Now, what this means, Prism itself is installed on every host in the cluster. The virtual IP address will simply redirect you to what we've noted as the Prism, or what has been elected as the Prism master running on the cluster. This effectively means that it provides a fully resilient solution. So if one of those nodes that runs that Prism master elected service is brought out of the cluster through either a planned or an unplanned scenario, because Prism is still available on any of the other hosts in the cluster, the virtual IP address will just simply redirect us. You'll also see the cluster name. Now I'm just going to rename that to something a little bit more sensible for this demo, and I'm just going to call it prod, short for production, and then I'll just click save. As we move from left to right on the dashboard, let me start by looking at the hypervisor summary. So for this demonstration, we are running Nutanix's own hypervisor, AHV. And just a little note on Prism Central. Prism Central is freely available from the Nutanix website. It can be downloaded and deployed either as a single VM or a highly available set of VMs, if you like. And it can be used to manage multiple clusters. As I've said, itself is freely available to download, but it can also be used to unlock some of the additional licensable options that are available through the Nutanix Cloud Infrastructure, NCI, and the Nutanix Cloud Manager, NCM, software options. Now, I will include a link to the Nutanix website, which will provide more information on the NCI and NCM software options. Now, as we move to the right-hand side, the second column along, this is where we'll see our performance metrics and resource utilization. Take note of the blue highlighted section there. I'll come back to that later on. We've got health and data resiliency. And then we've got our critical alerts, warning alerts, information alerts or informative alerts, apologies, and now events. And if you navigate around the dashboard, please take note of some of the active links that are available through each of the widgets. So as an example, if I select this CVM IP address is using a default password as a critical alert, if I select that, very handily, it gives you some more information about what that is, what that alert relates to. But more handily, it gives you the option to view a knowledge base article. So if we select that, that is going to open that KB article directly from the Nutanix support portal. So it's going to give you a lot more information. And if need be, you can look at resolving that alert yourself. So I'm just going to close that now. And then I will close that. Now, if I go to under the health, green's normally good, amber's a warning, red is critical. And you can see here, if we scroll down and then back up, you can see here we have a critical health notice along our services. So what I can do is I can directly click on that as well. And there's our cluster services listed there. And in the right-hand side, there are many ways that we can drill into this, but if we go on the right-hand side, what we're looking for is a cross, a failure to signify that there's been a failure. So if we scroll down, we'll look, there we go. So the CVM is using the default password. So we have kind of circled round to what we noted before under the alerts. Now, if you select summary, this gives you an idea of the number of checks that are constantly running across the platform. If we select actions and then manage checks, you can select any number of these checks. And in the right-hand side, there's a little bit of information, causes of failure, resolutions. But again, we give you the ability to select and open a knowledge base article, which will give you, in the first instance, more information for you to act on or to allow you to potentially resolve any issue yourself. If I go back to entities, actions again, NCC. So NCC is the Nutanix cluster check. Now it runs on a set frequency, which you can alter, you can change that. But you can also run the checks manually. Now what that means is before you make any updates or changes to the cluster, whether it's a firmware upgrade on the hardware, whether it's a software update, or whether you're installing or enabling a new piece of functionality through the console, you can run the Nutanix cluster check prior to doing so to make sure that all the services are set up, or everything's aligned, and that will mean that your install experience will be that much better. The next one is the collect the logs. So if we select collect logs, now this is especially useful if you need to raise a support ticket with Nutanix. You can, first of all, select nodes. So if you've got a particular problem with one of the nodes, or you can select all of them, we can click done. And then we click next. Now you can select all of the logs or specific by certain tags. For this demonstration, I'm just going to keep it selected at the default, which is all. Next. Then you can select the duration for the logs to be collected. So if whether it's over a certain period of time, and you can select the destination for the collected logs. And then you can select collect. Especially useful, again, if you need to raise a support ticket with Nutanix. I'm just going to close that there now. If we go to the very top left of the dashboard, you'll see the Nutanix X. So if you hit that, this will always bring you back to that home dashboard. Now I'm just going to spend a little bit of time going through some of the other options, if you like, that you can see through the dashboard. The first one, an intuitive drop-down menu. Now, as I progress through the demo, I'm going to select some of those options available there. So I'll come back to those in a moment. If we move along, we've got health. We've got our critical alerts. And we've also got our recent tasks and task activity. Especially useful if you've, I don't know, creating a VM, it will list it as a task, you can drill into the task, you can monitor it, and so on. On the right-hand side, you can see a magnifying glass. Now, Nutanix Prism has quite a good search engine, if you like, built into the platform. So as an example, if I just typed VM, press return, as you can see there, it's listing some of the VMs with that VM in the name. If I press carriage return though, it's took me to the VM dashboard, if you like. Again, intuitive through the pull-down menu. If we now select the question mark, this effectively gives you links to all the different documentation available through Nutanix. We've got tutorials based on the health option, again, available through the pull-down menu. There's the Nutanix Next community. So this is where our customers gather together, form a community, and they can share different topics of interest. Online documentation, as I've said, along with the support portal. So this is directly access into the Nutanix support portal, where you can raise tickets, get access to all the documentation, and so on. Where we can select the user account that we've logged in, we can change password, we can update the profile, and then we can start doing a few more little interesting things, such as download the commandlets or download the NCLI. So if you prefer to work command line, whether it's through PowerShell or the NCLI, so the Nutanix command line interface, you can download all of the necessary bits and pieces that you need to be able to do that. So you're able to then build in whatever scripting you would like to do, any other access into third-party tool sets that you may have. And along with that, you may want to check out the APIs that we have. Nutanix is API open. And again, in the description, I will include a link to the nutanix.dev website, which will provide you with a wealth of information on using the latest versions of the APIs. And again, this is such a powerful way of providing that level of potential automation and orchestration with hooks into third-party applications, such as a ticketing system like ServiceNow. It's very powerful. I do suggest that you have a look at nutanix.dev and just to see, have a little browse around and have a look at sort of what some of the APIs can offer you, and that's what this API Explorer will give you. Now, the next thing is this cog. Now, the cog is simply the settings. Again, settings is also available through the pull down, very intuitive. There are lots of different options within the settings. I don't intend to take you through each one. I'm just going to take you through some of the more popular options, if you like. And I'll start with expanding the cluster. Now, as you'll have noticed before, we've got 3 hosts within this cluster. Now, if you take the scenario whereby you've increased your cluster size from 3 to 4 hosts, you've procured a new 4th host, you've slotted it into your block, or you've racked and stacked it accordingly. So how do you expand your 3 host cluster into 4? Very simply, and without any downtime or without any impact to your current running environment. You've got 2 options. First of all, you can expand the cluster right here, right now, or you can prepare the node for an expansion later on. If I just select next to expand the cluster, just give it a moment for it to automatically pick up the host. So it's the 4th host in this particular block. Don't worry too much about the different terminology that I'm using, but it's the 4th node. We've already got hosts A, B, and C. So I'm going to select that node there, that host, and then I'm just going to select next. IP address is been pre-populated. Click next. Now you do have the option with Nutanix of out of the box, we're a in terms of hardware, we're a hyper-converged infrastructure platform. Nutanix itself, we're a software organization. Building on the HCI platform, we can now not just offer HCI, which offers nodes that can run both compute and storage together, along obviously with networking. We can provision options. So as you can see here, we've got an option to provide storage-only nodes. Now, these have their own use cases, so you can choose if you've got enough compute in your environment and you need a lot more storage, you can do so with storage-only nodes, which may be a hardware platform that has got a lot more disk densities available to it. The option that's not listed within this demo environment is also you can do compute-only nodes as well. For this demo, I'm just going to stick to the default HCI node. I'm going to click next. Now, I can skip the host networking section at this point because everything I know has been set up beforehand. I know the IP addresses, they've been pre-populated as part of this demo environment, so I don't need to worry about that. All of the uplinks have been pre-done, so I'm cheating to a certain extent, but it's very straightforward to do. So I'll just skip host networking. And the last option, configure host. And it's loading. And once it's loaded, I'll be able to, first of all, I can run the checks. So this goes back to the Nutanix cluster check bit I said before. So we can run the cluster check just to check everything's ready for the new host. And then I can expand the cluster. Now, I'm going to continue with the demo environment. I'm going to continue going through everything that I want to show you. And it's going to be expanding the cluster in the background. We'll come back to it later on. The next one thing I want to show you is image configuration. Now, image configuration is a repository whereby you can start saving your ISO files, your disk files, so that when you start looking at creating and operating your VM estate, you're able to refer back to this image configuration, this repository where you've conveniently stored all of your ISOs and your disks. So we will come back to that when we create a VM. But as you can see there, we can easily upload any number of different images. If we select remote support, Nutanix was built on the premise that with HCI, or was built on HCI because Nutanix wanted to give our customers a performant yet fully resilient and self-healing platform in that components can fail. It's how the platform reacts to that and repairs or self-heals. Now, there are cases where you will need to raise a support ticket. And it's a bit of homework that you need to do on the Net Promoter Score. The Net Promoter Score, very simply, is a value measured from -100 to +100. The closer you are to +100, customers are more likely to recommend that organization, in this case Nutanix, to other customers. So it's a highly valued, prized, if you like, support experience. Now, at the moment, we are running at +90 for the last few years. Now, you can find this out for yourself and you can measure this against some of the other vendors that you may be looking into. Now, as part of this user experience, if you need to raise a support ticket, you can enable remote support, which effectively means that the reliability engineer who's on the other end of the call, who's the person who will take your call and close your call without any handoffs, that you can enable it and they can then remote in and provide assistance to resolve any of the issues. So in my experience, you raise a support ticket, the Nutanix support representative will get in touch with you. They'll say we can set up a remote session. You will enable remote support. They can dial in and you can shadow them. You can learn from them, but they will assist you in resolving any of your issues. Leading on to remote support, but very much related, is something called Pulse. Pulse is an automated support system. So it provides diagnostic system data to Nutanix. So that we are able to provide more of a proactive support experience for our customers. So should something arise, whether it's a faulty DIMM or a hard drive may be generating more errors, so it may need replacing, we can proactively raise support tickets, notify, ship parts out. And as you can see there by some of the text on the screen, resolution time can be reduced by up to 40%. Now, when you first deploy your cluster and you first log in, you're given the option to either enable Pulse or disable Pulse. It's entirely your call. From Pulse, the other bits I'm going to show you are network configuration. Okay, so the next thing, oh, let's figure why are they doing all this? My God, such shit. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to show you is the network configuration. So the network configuration, and again, we'll come back to this a little bit when we start creating our VMs. This is where you can hook into your local area network. So you can create additional subnets, depending on what kind of VLAN topology you have. But on a quick note, for network configuration, we can have a number of different flexible options in terms of presenting the hosts into your top of rack switching. So we can have active-active, active-passive, active-active with load balancing, and so on. So those are the kind of things that will be discussed with you during initial deployment. Now, from the network configuration, we can scroll down and then we can have a look at alert email configuration. Now, it's entirely up to you whether you want to access the dashboard through Prism manually more, or whether you want to be notified on what's going on within your clustered environment. If you want to be notified, fill in the email recipients, enable, disable whichever options you need. You can set up custom rules, the email content, and so on. Again, it's entirely up to you if you want to do that. Now, moving away from the settings, I'm going to drop down and we can now look at some of the other aspects of Prism, starting with storage. Now, the dashboard is a similar look and feel to what we've seen already. If I simply select the overview tab there, so we've got overview, diagram, and table, but starting with overview, I can select view details. And this effectively just gives us a breakdown of all the useful storage metrics that we have available. Now, as a quick note, you may also be able to count that there are now 4 total nodes or hosts in the cluster. If I just close that and then pop into the diagram view. Now, the diagram view again provides a similar breakdown, although it does have the additional benefit of giving you some more metrics on usage summary, performance summary, storage alerts, and storage events. If we select the table view now, and if we start with the storage pool. Now, the storage pool is a collection of physical disks across all of the nodes in the cluster, and it's assigned to a storage pool. You will also see that we have details provided across the storage events, storage alerts, performance summary, and the usage summary again. Volume group is essentially a collection of VDisks, virtual disks, which you can present directly to VMs. Volume groups allow you to create shared disk access across virtual machines. For example, Oracle RAC is a clustered application that can use volume groups. Volume groups can be deployed with load balancing, in that ownership of the VDisks can be made across all of the nodes in the cluster, thereby providing much better performance. The last one to look at is a storage container. Storage container is simply a portion or a subset of available storage within the pool, within that storage pool. So this is where you can use the default storage container, but you can create additional storage containers, and you can start looking at deduplication, enabling compression, erasure coding, and so on. You'll also note there is something there referenced as the replication factor. Now, this may be something that's of interest, and it may be something that you've already learned and understood from your account team. But Nutanix don't use RAID. So in terms of resiliency, for every block of data that's written from a virtual machine, first of all, we write it with data locality in mind. So it's to that node or to that host. But then we write a second copy. We have a replication factor. So we have two copies of that data. So in the event of a node coming out of the cluster, whether it's a planned or an unplanned scenario, we have a second copy of that data. Now, there's a lot more to this, which is pretty much out of scope for this demo, but there's a lot more in terms of the architecture that provides so many different benefits and performance improvements using a Nutanix architecture. Now, we're effectively done with the storage. We're not looking at this platform as a siloed environment where you need to look at your storage LUNs, your storage fabric, the networking component, and then a separate compute. Everything's built into this hyper-converged platform and managed through Prism. So now we can just have a quick look, and I'll show you what the hardware looks like. So if we go from storage, go straight into hardware. Again, similar dashboard. Again, I'm going to start with overview. Lots and lots of different metrics across all of the different hosts or the nodes within the platform. We can drop into the diagram view, and you can see a graphical representation of what it looks like. So here we've got our 4 nodes, node 1, 2, 3, and 4. We can select any one of those nodes, and we can get some nice metric data. And again, just to call out, I'll cover it off in a moment, but just to cover this blue highlighted bit, add chart to analysis page, I'll come back to that. We can also select individual disks as well. Now, it may sound like a silly thing, but if you're in a data center and you've been monitoring, say, this disk here, and you've noticed it's generating quite a few errors, your colleague has walked into the data center. How are they certain that they're removing that disk or that node physically? So you can turn on the LED, and then you can turn it off as well. So at least you're able to safely remove those kind of units. Now, if we select the table view, again, a lot more metrics and some notifications. We don't have any notifications at the moment, but if there were some notifications, we would have them listed here, and it would give us some more information on that in that environment. You'll notice there we can also go, instead of going from the settings, we can select expand cluster there. We can select any one of the hosts, and it'll give us all the different metrics there. And this is where you can actually remove the host as well. So just to give you a little bit of a scenario on why you would want to do that. Nutanix can mix generations, and they have, I've already commented about being able to mix different node types within a clustered environment. But let's say your infrastructure was 5 years old, everything's running, but you wanted to do a hardware refresh, or you wanted to introduce some newer nodes and then retire some of the older ones. You can expand your cluster with the new nodes. That's not an issue. And if you want to retire some of the older ones, basically come into here, select the relevant node, and then select remove host. So what that basically means is that all the services that were running in the background will quiesce, they'll move or migrate some of the live VMs over to the other nodes, and then you'll be left in a situation where that node can be switched off and removed physically from the rack. Now, the next thing that we really need to do is create a VM. So we'll drop into the VM. Now, the first thing to call out, as you can see here, there are 4 VMs. These are what's noted as the controller virtual machines. Now, these CVMs, the controller virtual machines, there's one for each node, and they effectively run the Nutanix operating system. Okay, just leave them alone. Don't need to do anything with them. They're there to provide the Prism management interface, and obviously there's a whole bunch of services that are built around that platform as well. So for the sake of this demo, we can just untick that, and then we'll just remove them. Now we can now create a virtual machine. Very straightforward. I'm just going to very unimaginatively give this a name. I'm going to scroll down. Virtual CPUs 2. The ratio of cores per CPM are going to be 2 again. Memory 8. And again, you just choose what's appropriate to you. And then I'm going to add a new disk. And this goes back to the image configuration service, which I showed you earlier. There's our CentOS disk. I'm going to add that. And the only other thing I need to do is add a new NIC. I'm going to add NIC. There's the subnet information. Primary, connected. I'm going to click add. We do have other options about setting host affinity or providing custom scripts. But at the moment, I'm just going to click save. Okay, so our VM has now been created. I can select the VM. And then if I scroll down a little bit, it gives you the options to like manage the guest tools, power on, which we will select. We can take snapshots, we can clone that virtual machine, we can update the configuration, or we can just simply delete it. If I right click on it, I can also, I've just got to wait till it switches on a little bit more. There you are. We can launch the console. So I'm just going to quickly launch the console. And then when that refreshes, we should see a CentOS login. Happy days. Let me just close that down there. We can also migrate. So we can migrate that VM to any of the other nodes in that cluster as well. Again, lots and lots of different metrics available, virtual disks, Phoenix, etc. Now, going back to some of the network config, I mentioned that we'd be able to do it through the VM. You'll see the network config option on the far right-hand corner. So again, there's multiple different ways of accessing the same thing. So if you were creating VMs, rather than going to the settings of the network configuration, you can drop straight into the network configuration from this particular aspect of the management interface. Now, we've got our VMs, we're up and running. So the next thing that we really need to look at is an element of data protection. Now, the data protection with Nutanix is baked in. So this is where I'm talking about a disaster recovery solution. So it's baked into the platform. There's nothing else to install. And as part of this demo, if I just select the cross here, so this is the prod cluster. I do have another cluster up and running. Again, if I just log in, 842 exclamation mark. This is a single node replication target, so it's a one host. If I select the cluster name in the top left again, I'm going to give it a little. I'm just going to say DR unimaginatively. Click save, just so that I know what we're looking at. Now, I'm just going to copy the cluster virtual IP address into the clipboard. And then I'm going to go back to the prod. So we're now on the production cluster, and I'm going to drop down from the menu into data protection. Now, again, we have not installed anything. This is baked into the platform. This is a general warning. With Prism Central, which I noted earlier on, and some of the additional licensable options available, you can use something called protection policies. It's out of scope for this video. We are focusing on protection domains. But very simply, protection policies is replication policies with testing, validation, supporting near sync and synchronous replication of data. The protection domain that we're focusing on in this demo is based on asynchronous replication of data. So I just click OK to that. The first thing that we need to do is we need to tell this production cluster about the remote site, about the DR cluster. So if I select remote site, it's a physical cluster. Remote site name, DR. Please note that ensure DR has also been configured prod as a remote site. So we'll do that in a moment. Cluster virtual IP address, pop that in there, and then click add site. Remote site created successfully, but it does also give us the option to throttle some of the bandwidth if we need to. We can also do clever things around network and the name mapping. So which default container does it look in? And so when we take a snapshot of that VM, what's the target container name going to look like? I'm just going to leave those as the defaults, and I'm just going to click save to that. Now, as it's suggested, I need to pop to the DR cluster. Apologies for jumping around, but we're now in the DR cluster. I'm going to drop into data protection. Click OK, and then we need to add a remote site. I'm going to add a physical cluster. I'm going to call that as prod. And apologies, I need to just grab that virtual IP address from prod. So I'm just going to add that. Oh, I'm just going to add that address to the clipboard. Back to the DR cluster. Paste the virtual IP address in there. Add site. Again, bandwidth throttling, just going to leave them at the default. Save. Now, I'm done with the DR cluster for the moment, so I'm just going to pop back into prod. So both clusters know about each other. We've got a production, we've got a single node replication target or DR cluster. Now what we have is this protection domain. Now a protection domain is what we wrap the VMs into. So asynchronous, I'm going to very imaginatively call it KMPD1, protection domain 1. I'm going to create it. Now we have to select the entities. We haven't got that many to choose from, so we'll select the VM. I'm going to select that box. It's going to jump over on the right-hand side. I'm going to click next. Schedule. So we can do a new schedule. So I'm going to say repeat every, I don't know, 6 hours. It's going to start. Retention policy. So how many copies of the snapshots, how many different snapshots is it going to copy? So I'm going to keep the last one snapshot local, but I'm going to send one remotely, and I'm going to keep one remotely as well. Create a schedule, close. And that's it. That is effectively done. What we can do, if I select that protection domain, it gives us more options. It gives us more metrics, more useful monitoring metrics down below. So we've got the entities, we've got the schedules, local snapshots, remote snapshots. Now, nothing's happened just yet. So it'll eventually happen, but just for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to take a snapshot. I'm going to take a local snapshot, and I'm also going to send it over to the DR. Replication now, save. Okay, we've not dropped into it, but I'm going to have a look at these tasks so we can have a look at all of the different tasks that are running. If we have a look down here now, you can see that there's a local snapshot. And if we have a look at the remote snapshots, we've got one remote as well. Now, if we waited, that would have happened as part of that schedule. Now we have two options available to us now. We have the option to migrate. So we can migrate that virtual machine over to the DR cluster. So that will effectively mean quiescing the services and the VM from the source cluster and activating or so enabling that snapshot and then giving us the ability to power on that VM on the target cluster. Now, if we take a scenario whereby this cluster was not available, there was a cluster failure, maybe the rack powered down, but you needed to recover that virtual machine. So what can you do? So if you've got your DR cluster up and running, drop into it. Have a look at the protection domain that's been configured. And instead of a migrate option, you have an activate option. Now, the activate option will simply, if I select it, are you sure you want to activate the protection domain PD1? I want to say yes. Now, this is basically this scenario is whereby it's effectively an unplanned scenario. So the migrate is a planned scenario. You want to migrate a virtual machine from a source to a target. The activate is an unplanned scenario. So you've lost access to the main cluster. Now, if we have a look at VMs and have a look at the table, there's our VM. And we are on the DR cluster. And this now gives us the option, gives us the ability to power on that VM. And once it's powered on, I'll be able to launch the console. Just give it a moment to refresh. Oh. Launch console. And then we should see the CentOS login screen again. Now, because I've still got that production cluster up and running, if we just drop straight back into it and then go to VMs, it's still got that VM running because we chose to activate. So with production domains, there is a little bit of tidying up to do to make sure that you don't have duplicate VMs running, but that's something that is easily documented and you can follow through the Nutanix guidelines. And if I select oh, I didn't want to do that. If I select the cross to go back to the dashboard, that's it. Now, just a couple of things to finish off with. The first one was the analysis. So if you remember through some of these widgets, you see these blue options here. First of all, let me just go into the analysis page. So the analysis page is fairly empty. It's got some alerts, it's got some events, but it's fairly empty. So if I just go back to the dashboard and if I just add this one to the analysis page, it adds it. It adds that chart. I can save the chart. I can create new charts. And I can build this up. So I can grab charts from throughout the interface, throughout Prism console, put them into this analysis page. So if there was something, whether you wanted to pick out a trend analysis or whether you wanted to do some further diagnostics on particular VMs, you can grab all the different charts that you need that will help you resolve whatever you need to do. And you can bring them all into this one page. So it's a lot more efficient. It's a lot more easier to navigate. Next one I want to draw your attention to is file server. Now, this is, again, technically out of scope for this demo, but instead of installing any kind of network attached storage or simply having virtual machines hosting SMB or NFS file shares, you can deploy Nutanix files as part of our unified storage capability and enjoy the benefits. There's no more, they don't need to manage a siloed environment. You don't need to manage, let's say, a Windows VM separately that provides all the sharing the permissions. You can use the Nutanix tool set to do this. Now, included with the cluster, you get a 1 TB license included. In terms of licensing, you only license what you need after that. So if you've got 1 TB included, but you've got 10 TB of data, you would license for that other 9. The final component that I really want to show you is something called LCM or Lifecycle Management. Now, again, you'll have noticed throughout this whole demo that everything's been built into the platform. We've not really installed anything. We've created a virtual machine, but everything that we've needed has been built in. We've operated it through the same dashboard, effectively. LCM or Lifecycle Management is all about offering an easy solution to all of your hardware and software updates. The first thing that we can do is we can have a look at the inventory. So the inventory clearly states what components are installed along with the versions. Now, please take note that we've got hardware information along with software. So the LCM capability with Nutanix can manage both. After you run an inventory, you can select updates. Now, at the moment, note that we're running the Nutanix operating system version 6.5. The current version as of the release of this video is actually 6.8. But if we drop into software, depending on the platform that you have and depending on what versions of software you have installed, the available versions will be automatically determined, or the best available versions will automatically be determined. That means you no longer need to go to each individual website to find out the compatible version for certain products and make sure that they're all compatible and that they work together. LCM will do all of that for you. Now, for this example, you can either select all of the software and then view an upgrade plan, or we can select an individual component. So the Nutanix EOS, the operating system, if you like. Let's view the upgrade plan. So while it's generating the upgrade plan, we have the option, we can, please note that the CVM, one CVM will be rebooted at a time. So that means we'll do a rolling upgrade across the cluster. There'll be no downtime. So because it's a rolling upgrade, the first node will go. It'll do an upgrade. Any VMs, if it needs to be rebooted, any VMs that are on there will be migrated to the remaining hosts in the cluster. The first node will be upgraded. It'll be brought back online. Then the VMs will be migrated back, and so on. And so it progresses until it completes the whole cluster. If for any reason there's an issue, it will stop. It will not continue, and it will pause what it's doing so that you're able to look at the alerts, drill into it, maybe open a KB article, maybe even if you need to, open up a remote support tunnel, talk to Nutanix support. They'll dial in, they'll resolve it for you, and it'll continue the upgrade. For this demo, I'm just going to click next, and I'm going to apply one update, which is going to update EOS from version 6.5 to 6.557 in this particular case. Apply the update, and away we go. So there's a process bar. The tasks will be updated accordingly. And again, we can quite happily just continue to use the platform as we deem fit.